So for this lecture, we're going to deal with the environment and attempting to define it. So we're going to look at abiotic factors that define environments. There are a few learning objectives that turn out to fulfill this for the AP exam. And here are the page references, so there's quite a few. But for those of you who took APES, this shouldn't be too hard. So whenever we look at an environment, it turns out to be kind of important because, as we'll deal with later, the environment is what dictates natural selection. So we need to know the environment because it affects all sorts of other things. So it helps if we can describe an environment. And when we do that, we usually use two different sets of descriptors. Ones we call the biotic, ones that we call the abiotic. The biotic factors are everything that has to do with stuff that was alive or once was alive. Meaning if you have dead carcasses in soil, that counts as a biotic factor because those are things that were once alive. If you're dealing with actual living organisms, obviously those also count as being alive. If it's food, food is living organisms, so that counts as being alive. Everything else turns out to be abiotic. Meaning, is there shade? How sunny is it? What's the temperature? How much water is there? Is it precipitating? What type of soil composition do you have? All those things turn out to be abiotic. One of the big deals that turns out to exist in terms of abiotic factors on Earth is where you happen to be in terms of latitude and longitude. Latitude is moving up the ladder, meaning moving from the South Pole towards the North Pole. Longitude is as we move from the so-called east to the west, which are relative terms just because of the way the Earth is built. The reason why these turn out to be important is because that dictates where winds turn out to be. And where winds are located, that helps figure out what's going on. So we have an activity for you to do in class that deals with water and mountains. So this we're not doing right now. When we look at an environment, we also have to deal with, like I said, soil. And you could look at soil. So I think in APES you looked at the texture triangles, but I'm not sure. Along with soil comes things like how much light there is, how much light penetration there is, what type of light is moving through. We are dealing with temperatures, whether there's wind, because temperature and wind help dictate things like whether there'll be precipitation or not, or what type of precipitation you'll turn out to have. We also have to deal with the availability of water and how much oxygen is in the water. What is the source of that oxygen? Because that could be biological or it could not be biological. How salty is that water? We have what type of salt is it? The environment is heavily dependent upon a lot of different things that we just take for granted and we ignore. When it comes to things like oxygen, if you turn out to have an environment where the oxygen levels actually fluctuate throughout the day, that tells you that, oh, we're dealing with biological oxygen. If oxygen levels tend to be consistent, that tells you that we're dealing with non-oxygenated or non-biological sources of oxygen. Meaning you're dealing with a waterfall or rapids, not photosynthetic organisms. Hopefully in APES you went through and you figured out biologically dissolved oxygen. We'll do this later in the year. But hopefully you figured out this stuff and you actually could read a nomogram, which is what one of these turn out to be. You take the temperature of the water, you take how much oxygen there is, and you figure that by titration, and you just connect the 2 points, and it tells you how saturated the water turns out to be. Hopefully that's stuff that you've done before in APES. I know this was fast, but it should be review for all of you.